my bold prediction for Charlie is I don't know which quarterback I would start next week, so I'm going to make a bold prediction and say against me, Charlie picks the lower scoring quarterback to start next week.
Okay. So he picks the lower. So it doesn't matter which one he picks. It's just whichever one he picks is going to be the lower score.
It's going to be the lower score. Yeah,
right,
it's tough. Enough. I mean, Derek Carr. I don't want to ask the question on the podcast and try to point him in any direction. From maybe he should not listen to me anyway. The way my team is going, but Derek Carr has the Chiefs, so potentially could be a game script there. Maybe the Chiefs have lost enough weapons that their offense might struggle just as they did on Sunday. So I could see that kind of being a low-scoring game or a high-scoring game right now. And then you've got Darnold against the Jets, a defense who's playing really, really well. They're one of the tougher matchups in the league, so It's tough. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. Now we've been doing bold predictions, so I'm going to do I'm going to get my bold prediction out of the way here, and I'm just going to be Mike's team here. Tyreek Hill. I am predicting they're playing New England next week at New England. I believe that he goes over 100 yards and has a touchdown against New England next week. I think Tyler Huntley is better than what he showed. I think that with another full week of practice, trying to get on the same page as Tyreek Hill, he could have hit Tyreek for, I think it was like one or two bombs in that game. He just missed them. He overthrew one, he underthrew another. So he's looking for him. He does have 7 targets. I just think that Tyler Huntley is better than that. So I think that next week Tyreek Hill has 100 yards and gets in the end zone.
Okay. Josh is doing his punishment for the week in front of our children.
And I'll scare you right out of your pants. To a guy in Kentucky, I'm Mr. Unlucky, and I'm known throughout England and France. And by a dead,
Oh, that was not a good one.
Are you done already?
No.
I'm right here, Mom. You sound like the picture. I can't look over there. I'll look here, though.
And welcome back to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast with your host, Solo Edition, Adam Jackson, here to go over the Week 5 matchups. Very interesting week with a lot of teams now going above 500. Had a lot of teams, go from 1-3 to 2-3, things of that nature. And we finally had our first defeat for one team, so there are no longer any undefeated teams in the Beltway Wars Invitational, and there are no longer any winless teams in the Beltway Wars Invitational. So, looking at the scores and everything like that, very exciting. A lot of parity in this league, as always. And as we see week in and week out, any team can beat any other team if they get hot at the right moment. So let's go over to our first matchup of the week. So with our first matchup of the week, we're going to start with the Pikesville Pink Pony Club defeating the Finksburg Freaks 153.62 to 133.04. Dustin's squad now goes to 2-3 on the season, while Tom's squad also goes to 2-3 on the season. So two teams that are evenly matched in terms of record and a very, very high scoring game in this matchup in week 5. But let's start over with Dustin. Dustin, Lamar Jackson against Cincinnati. My goodness, did he look good. MVP number 3, perhaps, in his future. If he keeps playing like this, that is sure to be a foregone conclusion for Lamar Jackson. 26 for 42, 348, and 4 touchdowns. Also runs for 55 yards as well for a 33-point day. Ramondre Stevenson, 12 carries, 89 yards, and a touchdown. Does get 4 receptions for only 3 yards, but each one of those receptions count for something, and that is 2 whole points with 4 receptions out of his running back position. Kenneth Walker, kind of a quiet day and I would say a shocking loss for Seattle to lose to the Giants. 5 carries, 19 yards. Is involved in the passing game, so saves his day a little bit there. 7 for 8, 57 yards. Justin Jefferson, loved the 14 targets, 92 yards, but does not get in the end zone. So I would say his end zone streak comes to an end. He was in the end zone or caught a touchdown pass in his first 4 games. So this is the first game that he has not caught a touchdown. Drake London, one of my favorite players coming out of the draft to be drafted in the second round, 12 for 13, 154 yards and a touchdown in that shootout game on Thursday night for 27.40 points. Keenan Allen, not much happening in this one. In a blowout against Carolina, 3 for 6, 33 yards. Brock Bowers is probably the most impressive rookie fantasy tight end in a long time. 8 for 12, 97 yards and a touchdown. He is the number 1 ranked tight end in fantasy football after 5 weeks. I'm sure everyone had that on their bingo card. DeAndre Swift, 21 carries, 73 yards and a touchdown. He seems to be going there in Chicago. Looks like they finally realize what they have there and are giving him a lot of work. So a great little play out of his flex spot going forward. Jake Moody, 6 points, and also out. Let's see what his injury designation would face a month-long absence. So Dustin may be looking for another kicker here and starts the Baltimore defense, which got shredded by Joe Burrow, but still ends up with positive points. Looking at his bench, Michael Wilson, 5 for 6, 78 yards. That's kind of interesting. Cortland Sutton, nothing really happening. Roma Dunze, only 5 catches for 40 yards. Aaron Rodgers throws 3 picks against Minnesota and now gets his coach fired. I don't believe any of the reports coming out that he had no say in this. You always ask your quarterback, and he always runs the head coach out of town, it seems. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently because I don't want to spend too much time, and you don't want to spend too much time listening to me, I'm sure. But I'm going to pick a player from every team that's the biggest question mark. So in terms of question marks, you see that as a negative, but it's more of, are they going to continue the performance they had this week going forward, or are they going to regress and go back to what they maybe have been in some of the other weeks? So on Dustin's squad, I would say the biggest question mark for him is Drake London. 27 points out of him on week 5. The most points by far so far in fantasy. He scored 2 points in the first week, 9 points in the fourth week, 14, 15 in the second and third, 27 points with a season high 13 targets. That's the biggest question mark for me. Can he continue to be around this number of getting 13, 14 targets a game, of the upper echelon wide receivers of, let's say, Justin Jefferson, Rashid Rice, people like that, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek? Can he demand that sort of target share in this offense, regularly throughout each game? It doesn't seem like their defense is too good, so their positive game script should be there. But if Drake London can continue what he did in week 5, Dustin is a very, very scary team. As Lamar Jackson, you have up top there. Ramondre Stevenson seems to have gotten out of the doghouse. You always have Kenneth Walker. I know he had a down game. And Justin Jefferson, he's going to get his. So out of the, quarterback, 2 running backs, and first 2 wide receivers, if Drake London can become a number 1 wide receiver in fantasy, Dustin has a very, very scary team moving forward. Even at 2-3, not a team I'd really want to face if Drake London keeps it going. But let's go over to the other side of the matchup here, and that would be Tom, now 2-3 on the season. Starting with his quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, as we've talked about, throws for the yardage here, 331, but does throw an interception, 13 points. Just looking at his season thus far, has not gone over 20 points thus far. Quarterback number 15. The last time he's been over 20 points was last year, week 12 against the Raiders with 20.8 points. So, continues to struggle, it seems. It seems that, they're running the ball a little bit. They're making plays, but it doesn't seem like he's having that 4-touchdown game that we know that he can have. So kind of concerning there, but the concern has been there all season. and the back part of last season for Patrick Mahomes, so this is nothing new. Breece Hall also kind of struggles in this one. 9 for 23, 3 for 4 in the air, 14 yards. Does go against a tough Vikings defense. I'm not really sure if anyone saw that coming, of how good the Vikings defense was going to be, but they seem to be legit. Travis Etienne, 6 carries, 17 yards, 6 for 7, 43 yards for a respectable 9 points. DK Metcalf, 4 for 7, 55 yards, does lose a fumble in this one in their loss against the Giants. Brian Thompson, which is probably the biggest, or one of the biggest steals in the draft. I would say also Rashid Rice before he got hurt. But Brian Thomas continues to score points. 5 for 8, 122 yards and a touchdown. Now wide receiver number 7 in fantasy football. Xavier Worthy, carries 1 for a touchdown. Kind of really that gadget player. 3 for 6, 25 yards through the air. Tyler Kraft comes out of nowhere, leads that Green Bay tight end, group. 4 for 5, 88 yards and 2 touchdowns for 22 points. T. Higgins also with a 2 touchdown day against the Ravens. 9 for 14, 83 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then he has Brandon Aubrey, 10 points, and San Francisco defense, 11 points. Looking at his bench here, did have some bye players. Justin Herbert, who probably wasn't going to start anyway. Gus Edwards on bye as well. One person I would like to mention, at least on his bench, is Mark Andrews. Has a better day. I mean, he couldn't have much worse of a day with posting a 0, but 4 for 5, 55 yards. Maybe he's finally coming around, which would be very interesting to see how Tom's going to work that tight end room if Mark Andrews finally gets it together with him and Tyler Kraft having the big day in Week 5. My biggest question mark for Tom's squad is Breece Hall. Kind of concerning here. You draft him as maybe the second running back off the board in terms of fantasy, around Bijan. Some people in the preseason were making overtures to saying that he could be the number 1 overall running back taken. But looking at his stats here, first 3 weeks are fine. 15 points, 20 points, 16 points. But the last 2 weeks now, 2.8, 5.2. And his snap share is kind of a little weird for a top running back. 69% in week 4, 74% in week 5. It seems like they're mashing it up a little bit in terms of the running back committee. He's the most talented one there, but it's going to cut into his opportunities. And you don't like to see only 9 rushing attempts out of a running back that you're drafting in the first round. So can Breece Hall become a top, 8 running back like he was drafted? Probably way more than top 8. But can he go back to week 1 through 3 where he's over 15 points in each of those? Or is it going to be more of the last 2 weeks, 2.8, 5.2? If he does continue to struggle, his next 3 matchups are Buffalo, which is a plus matchup, as we saw with Derrick Henry. Pittsburgh, which is not a plus matchup, and New England, which is also a tough defense as well. It'll be very interesting to see if he is still matchup proof. But for Tom, he needs him to really carry the squad in terms of the running back position, because Travis Etienne has been disappointing thus far, and there's really nobody else. I guess the next one would be Alexander Madison with 15 carries, but he is not efficient at all. So he really needs Breece Hall to step it up and become that top 5 really running back in fantasy that he drafted him as. And going to our next matchup of Week 5, we're going to go to Westminster Warbirds going 4-1 against the Reisterstown Rockets 3-2. Pat wins this one 143.28 to 86.06. As I said, Pat is now 4-1, tied for the league in wins, while Charlie is standing at 3-2, right in the thick of it as we are in Week 5. But let's start with Pat's team. Looking at Joe Burrow here, wow, what a breakout game. 30 for 39, 392 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. I would say that this is really the ceiling that you're going to see Joe Burrow in, and he looked great. He was hitting his wide receivers. Jamar Chase was making plays, which helps Joe Burrow's value. So 33.78 points. That is a great day for Joe Burrow, and he's really looking like he could be that top 5 quarterback that he was a couple years ago in fantasy. So good on Pat for finding that value later in the draft. James Cook, 20 carries, 82 yards and a touchdown, 2 for 3 through the air, 17 yards, 16.90 points. Chua Hubbard, the resurgence, 13 carries, 97 yards and a touchdown. Does catch the ball 4 times for -2 and loses a fumble in this one, but still scores 15.5 points. Josh Downs, I believe he was a late pickup. I'm not positive, but 9 for 12, 89 yards, 11.40 points. Very interesting that Colts wide receiver room when Joe Flacco is playing versus Anthony Richardson. I feel like more of them have value when Flacco is throwing them the ball than Richardson. Richardson's obviously the more exciting player, but in terms of the Colts wide receiver room, and if you have any of those wide receivers, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, I think you want Flacco behind the helm there in Indianapolis. Jalen Waddle, again, can't get on the same page with Tyler Huntley, 4 for 8, 46 yards in this one. Demarcus Robinson, 3 for 5, 28 yards, does salvage his day with a touchdown against Green Bay. Pat Freiermuth, 3 for 3, 22 yards and a touchdown, does lose a fumble, but does have a solid 7.7 points. Kyron Williams, 22 carries, 100 yards and a touchdown, loses a fumble as well in this one, but a solid 15 points. Tyler Bass scores 9 points, and Denver's defense scores a 17 against the Raiders. Looking at his bench, a lot of things going on here. You still have Jonathan Brooks on the PUP list. You have Bucky Irving kind of sitting there. Didn't do much in this one. You had Calvin Ridley on bye. You had A.J. Brown on bye. You had Shakir, who was the recent trade acquisition that was out for Week 5. Rashid Rice was just announced earlier today that he is out for the season, so that would be a corresponding move for Pat. Obviously a big blow, one of the rising stars in terms of fantasy football and real-life football, so tough to see him go out after only 4 games. But the biggest question mark I would say for Pat is A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, as we know, he's very talented when he's on the field. Now, he does have a little bit of injury history with this hamstring, soft tissue injury kind of things. Can he stay on the field enough to provide value for Pat? Missed the last 3 games, had the bye in Week 5. Looks like he's going to come back in Week 6, but Pat really cannot afford for A.J. Brown to re-injure a soft tissue injury like a hamstring, and he really needs him to be that, take the place of Rashid Rice, because Jalen Waddle is really struggling, and Demarcus Robinson is just kind of a player. So, with Waddle struggling with Tyler Huntley and losing Rashid Rice, I feel that A.J. Brown is of utmost importance for Pat going forward, and he really needs him to get back in form, really have, his Week 1 production of 20 points, around, 15, 20 points every single week to really establish himself as that number 1 wide receiver that Pat desperately needs at the moment. But 4-1, very good, very impressive. I think he is second in points. So Pat, well on his way to repeating as the Beltway Wars Invitational champion. But let's go over to Charlie. Charlie now goes to 3-2, 86.06. Starts Sam Darnold, which Pat said as a bold prediction that between Sam Darnold and Derek Carr, he was going to pick the wrong one to start, and he did. Derek Carr, even though he left early in this one, scored 12 points, while Darnold scored 4. Darnold goes 14 for 31, 179 yards and an interception, and loses a fumble. 4 points, nothing good there out of your quarterback position. Javonte Williams, he starts him, 13 carries, 61 yards, 5 for 6 through the air, and 50 yards. Derrick Henry, 15 carries, 92 yards, a really big run at the end of that game. In overtime, a touchdown, catches 1 ball. Nico Collins, injury concern now, but 2 for 2, 78 yards and a touchdown. Nico Collins looks to be week to week, so Charlie is going to be missing his number 1 wide receiver for the foreseeable future. Hopefully not too long for him. Doesn't sound too serious, but they do say week to week, so I think it's a hamstring. Yep, so those are kind of tricky. You don't really know what the timetable is, but hopefully for Charlie, he's back sooner rather than later. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 4 for 7, 31 yards and a touchdown. Al Lazard also gets in the end zone in this one, 4 for 10, 34 yards and a touchdown. Dalton Kincaid really does nothing against Houston and what's kind of a discombobulated Buffalo passing attack right now. 2 for 6, 34 yards. Xavier Leggett, 1 for 1, 8 yards. Really came down from his, previous high 16 points last week. Came back down to earth in a hard way. Chris Boswell, 6 points, and Atlanta's defense, 3 points. Looking on his bench, he has some problems here. He has Jonathan Taylor, who was out at this one. Will not play in week 5. That's the best thing we have. So, will he be back next week? The projections have him back next week. Devontae Smith was also on bye as well, but he's expected to play in week 6. So those are the 2 players that you can really plug and play for Nico Collins and for Xavier Leggett. Going with that. My question mark for Charlie would be, who is starting at quarterback? Do we still trust, Sam Darnold? I do see on the transaction list that he did drop Derek Carr. Is he feel comfortable with Sam Darnold, or is he going to be going with somebody else? 10th ranked quarterback, off the waiver wire. You can't have too many of these 4-point games. We're seeing, week 1 through 4 have pretty nice days, 14, 19, 23, 20, but has a bye next week. So he actually has no quarterback to start right now. He will be looking on the waiver wire to play someone in week 6. But biggest question mark here, this team is very solid. Even with Nico Collins being out, you have Derrick Henry, you have Javonte Williams, you have Jonathan Taylor, Devontae Smith coming back as well, J.K. Dobbins, you cannot forget about him. But will this team be grounded by poor quarterback play if Sam Darnold can't get it together and has more of these types of games? Because, it's the talent for the rest of the rosters there. It's just Sam Darnold can't have a 4-point game, and you can't expect them to win with that point total. But now 3-2 on the season, and looking to go to get his 4th win in week 6. Now going to our third matchup of week 5, we had a really interesting one here. That would be the Conkersville Cox going to 4-1 over the Columbia Clown College, 148.44 to 104.48. The Columbia Clown College now goes to 1-4 on the season, with their only win, of course, against me when they scored 150 points. But I am not upset about that. So let's go over to Brian's squad first. Justin Fields, who was running the waiver wire for a little bit, but scores of 15.92 points, 15 for 27, 131 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air against Dallas. Josh Jacobs, 19 carries, 73 yards and a touchdown, does catch his 1 ball for 21 yards. Brian Robinson, not much doing in this one, really. 7 carries, 18 yards, but does have 2 touchdowns on the day against Cleveland. Jamar Chase, the big story out of Brian's squad, 10 for 12, 193 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Ravens, really torching them in their loss against Baltimore. Deebo Samuel, 3 carries for 9 yards, 1 for 3 through the air and 11 yards. Amari Cooper, as we talked about a little bit on the pod as well, 4 for 10, like the 10 targets, only 60 yards, no touchdowns. That Cleveland offense looks, so weird. There's no reason why they shouldn't be scoring points, especially against a weak defense like Washington. I would expect a quarterback change in the near future if things do not turn around, which would be good news for Brian because Amari Cooper, I feel like his ceiling is being limited with Deshaun Watson at the helm. Jake Ferguson, 6 for 7, 70 yards. I think it's Jordan Whittington, 7 for 10, 89 yards. So good little find there out of the flex spot for Brian. Fairbairn scores 17, and the Chicago defense scores 16. Looking at his bench, sort of an interesting play in Week 5. Benching Kyler Murray. Obviously not a plus matchup, but he does outscore Justin Fields in this one with 24 points. Also, another interesting name here is Jalen Wright. The Miami Dolphins are on bye in Week 6, but if Devon Achane does not come back after that and is out, for 2 weeks with a concussion, he is a very interesting name and could lead that Miami backfield while Achane is out. Jerome Ford only scores 6 in this one, but does go 9 for 47. Kind of okay, I guess, as we are waiting the arrival of Nick Chubb from the PUP list. And Rashid Shaheed has another one of these games, 4 for 9, 86 yards, and a touchdown. You just don't know when to play him. More often than not, he does well, but that big 0 in week 3 against Philadelphia really scares you from playing him week in and week out. My biggest question through 5 weeks for Brian is, will Brian Robinson continue this stretch of dominance, really? Of really just, over 15 points or, 13 to 15 points each and every week. Now running back 7 through 5 weeks. Doesn't get the carries in this one, but does have all the red zone looks and has scored a touchdown in 4 of his past 5 weeks to start the season. If he can continue this, he doesn't have a track record. 2022, he was number 41 in half PPR. 23, he was 22. Now he is 7th in running backs. If he can continue this and be a top 10 running back, Brian has a very solid squad with Josh Jacobs, Brian Robinson, and a couple other players here that he can fill in the flex spot, but he doesn't have to worry about the running back 1 or 2 if Brian Robinson continues this tear that he's on and continues to be a top 5 running back going forward. I don't see that changing, really. This offense is humming. Jaden Daniels is playing out of his mind. Teams have to respect his passing and running ability. And as we've seen in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson, the running ability for the quarterback really opens up things on the inside for the running backs. So Brian Robinson, I look for, even better days ahead for him. More yardage, more carries. This is just kind of a weird one where they were, had a very massive lead. I don't foresee that happening a lot with Washington. I think their defense does have problems. So I think there's going to be a lot more competitive games where he's going to be used a lot, 20-plus carries. I can see that easily happening with, I think, Austin Eckler on IR, or at least out for a couple more weeks. So look for Brian Robinson to continue to score, and I like him for the season going forward. But let's go over to the losing side here. We're now 1-4, Columbia Clown College, 104.48. Dak Prescott still doesn't seem to have it going yet, even in the win. 29 of 42, 352, 2 touchdowns. Also throws 2 picks in this one. Doesn't run the ball as it has been for the past couple seasons. Not really getting much rushing out of Dak Prescott. Aaron Jones goes out of this one, 7 carries, 29 yards. He appears to have avoided a long-term injury, so that is good news for Mike. They're on bye in week 6, so you weren't going to have him next week anyway. So hopefully he's only out 2 to 3 weeks, and he can be reinserted back into that starting lineup for Mike. James Conner, 19 carries, 86 yards, and a 2-point conversion for a solid 13 points. Tyreek Hill, kind of the same thing as Jaden Waddle here, 6 for 9, 69 yards. Can't get on the same page with Tyler Huntley. Marvin Harrison just has one of these games, 2 for 7, 36 yards. You kind of expect that out of a rookie, even as talented as he is, that he's going to have up and down weeks. This is definitely a down week this week. Christian Kirk, 4 for 4, 88 yards. Kind of an interesting player. That Jaguars offense seems to be getting better as the weeks go on, and they seem to be getting Christian Kirk more involved, as well as having Brian Thompson Jr. on the outside. So Christian Kirk out of the slot is a solid wide receiver 2, I would say, going forward. He's getting the looks, and he's a very talented player, and they paid him a lot of money, so he's going to be used. Travis Kelce, 9 for 10, 70 yards, seems to be the focal point of that passing attack for Kansas City. Probably the number 1 tight end going forward, just with the opportunities and the track record. Jordan Addison, 3 for 8, 36 yards. Koo goes for 18, and Seattle scores 9 points. Looking at his bench, apparently I was wrong about Austin Eckler. He was involved in this one a lot, but doesn't do as well as Brian Robinson, doesn't get the goal line work. Cam Akers, 9 carries, 42 yards and a touchdown. Mitchell, that big play threat, 4 for 738 yards. Throws a ball here. Isaiah Likely as well scores 2 touchdowns as well. Don't know how much you can trust this. Only 3 targets, 13 yards. But you do like to see him being involved in the red zone as well. So my biggest question for Mike's squad is Tyreek Hill. Obviously, it's not Tyreek Hill's fault that he's the number 28 wide receiver right now. With Tua going out, and now they're on their third quarterback, Tyler Huntley. But he needs to get on a better page with him. They need to get him the ball more. 9 targets in this one. He needs to be double-digit targets. They're all bye week 6, so maybe during the bye week they'll get a better rapport with each other in terms of whoever the quarterback's going to be and Hill. But you drafted him early in the first round. You need him to be better than wide receiver 28. And if this continues, it could be really bad for Mike, who's already 1-4, to really get things going. Tyreek Hill only scoring 9 points is not what you drafted him as. You need him to have those monster games. I could see having 1 or 2 monster games, but as we've seen with the Miami offense, it just looks like a struggle bus session right now. Can't run the ball, can't pass the ball, only score 15 points. You need to have better days ahead for Tyreek Hill. I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary, but Tyreek Hill needs to get going for Mike to have a chance to get back in this thing at 1-4. So at 1-4, obviously not great. Does have very talented players, but Tyreek Hill, Harrison, and Kirk really need to get it going. And he does have some players on the bench that he may be able to slide in for some fantasy production. So week 5, Brian goes to 4-1. Mike goes to 1-4. Now going to our next matchup of week 5, we finally have a team with their first win of the season. And that will be Alex's Owings Mills Ogres 136.92 to a first loss of the season. The Carlisle Cheddar going to 4-1, 106.46. So one of the biggest upsets of week 5 with Alex getting his first win of the season. But let's go over to the players involved. CJ Stroud scores has a 15-point day, 331 yards, a touchdown, and interception. Also loses a fumble. Kareem Hunt, who was a waiver wire pickup, 27 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Does catch one ball for 15 yards. 18 points out of the, from the waiver wire in a high-powered offense. That looks like a player that he's going to be starting week in and week out until proven otherwise. 27 carries in his second game with the Kansas City Chiefs is very impressive, and it shows that they trust him from the prior years that they had him on the squad. Antonio Gibson, 6 for 52, and has a catch in this one. Darnell Mooney, 16 targets, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns in that shootout against Tampa Bay. DJ Moore, 5 for 8, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns for a 25-point day. Zay Flowers, 12 targets as well, 111 yards for a 15-point day. David Njoku, nothing really happening in this one. 1 for 3, 14 yards. Again, that whole Cleveland offense looks pretty bad right now. Hard to trust really any of the pass catchers in that offense as it stands right now. Tank Dell, only 5 points in this one. Justin Tucker finally hits a 50-yard field goal. Thank God. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Thank whatever God you believe in. 13 points. And Dallas scores 9 points as a defense. On his bench, not looking too bad either. Geno Smith, 22.52 points. Roshan Johnson, 10 carries, 25 yards, does get in the end zone twice as well. So is he carving out a role with this, Bears offense where he gets the goal line work? Maybe. Trey Sermon, who was filling in for Jonathan Taylor, 10 carries, 38 yards, and a touchdown, 6 for 6, 25. And he had a lot of people on bye in this one. Gibbs, St. Brown, and Dallas Goedert all on bye. So very talented players he had on bye, but still is able to manage to score 136 points in his first victory of the season. My biggest question for Alex's squad through 5 weeks is, can DJ Moore continue to have the week 5 week that he had You know, has he really carved out his role in that Bears offense as the true number one wide receiver away from Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze? Plays 88% of the snaps, does get 8 targets on 105 yards. Obviously his best day of the season against his former squad. Now, wide receiver 16, can he start creeping up, to that top 10? As we know, Caleb Williams is going to get better as an NFL player as the weeks go on, as he gets more comfortable with the offense and the players around him. So this is a great sign for Alex that DJ Moore finally breaks out. When you're 1-4, you really can't afford to lose any more games. Can DJ Moore be that number one wide receiver that he was drafted as? I know that Alex has Amon-Ra St. Brown as well, but DJ Moore does have the capability of being a number one wide receiver in fantasy. Now has 3 touchdowns on the year. His last 2 weeks has a touchdown in each game. So they're looking for him. Caleb's looking for him, and he's a very talented player. Now has Jacksonville next week, which is a very plus matchup. Has a bye in week 7, then Washington, Arizona. So you can't really ask for better matchups for a wide receiver for the next 3 weeks other than the bye. So we will really see what he can do with that offense. And if this continues, Alex might have a turnaround. Who knows? It could happen, especially with Kareem Hunt doing what he's doing. He looks like he's found that running back number 2. And Nick Chubb is coming back. He is coming back soon. So you could put him in the flex spot while you had Jahmyr Gibbs there. Gibbs, Hunt, and Chubb are a very formidable 3 running back trio for Alex. So, might have written them off a little too early. 1-4, not the way you wanted to start, but he could go on a run here if all these players continue to do what they're capable of with Kareem Hunt, Gibbs, and if Nick Chubb can come back healthy and effective in that Cleveland offense. Let's go over to the losing side here. That'd be Jake with the Carlisle Cheddar, 106.46, now 4-1 on the season. Jordan Love, 15 for 26, 224 yards and a touchdown, interception. Zach Moss, 9 carries, 24 yards. Does get hurt in this one, I believe. It was his ankle. It doesn't seem to be serious, so that is good news for Jake. Alvin Kamara, kind of slow in this one. It was a very weird game as I watched it. Only 11 carries, 26 yards, 6 for 8 through the air, 40 yards. So it does complement his day with the receiving yards and catches. Garrett Wilson, 13 for 22, 101 yards and a touchdown in their loss against the Vikings. You need more of these days out of Garrett Wilson. This is the player that he was drafted as. And, 22-point day is a great sign to see for Jake's squad, who's already pretty stacked at each position. Starts Trey Tucker here. I'm sure it's for bye week reasons, but only 2 for 5, 18 yards. Jalen Reed, 4 for 6, 78 yards. Kyle Pitts has a nice day here in that shootout, like I mentioned before. 7 for 8, 88 yards. Trey Tracy as well, or Tyrone Tracy, 18 carries, 129 yards. So he's a very interesting player. Way more talented than Devin Singletary. Can he wrestle that job away? Don't know how long Singletary will be out for. But, in his first true showing, has a really nice day with 129 yards rushing. The kicker for the St. Group, only 1 for 2 on extra points. And the Steelers with 10 points. Looking at his bench, I think you could drop Dalvin Cook. I'm just saying. I don't know if he's even been active yet on the active roster, but I think it's safe to say he's able to be dropped. Does have Saquon Barkley on bye. Tyler Algier, really nothing happening. Mike Williams, nothing happening. Jalen Tolbert, though, with Brandon Cooks now being out for an extended period of time, 7 for 10, 87 yards and a touchdown. Jameson Williams on bye as well. So Jalen Tolbert, probably the most interesting player on the bench right now for Jake, as his role is expanding in that Dallas offense with Crooks being out. My biggest question through 5 weeks for Jake is Garrett Wilson. Started off slow, 9, 8, 11, 4. has the big week here, 22 points. Again, can this continue? Now we have a head coaching change there in New York. Does the new head coach or whoever's filling in find more ways to get him the ball, finds more ways to, just, get him in space and, interesting ways to get him the ball? That remains to be seen. But 22 points, that's what you're expecting out of this caliber of player. We know the talent is there. He's kind of had trouble getting on the same page with Aaron Rodgers at times. Does the coaching change continue this, growth between Rodgers and Wilson? That remains to be seen. But with Garrett Wilson, if he can really get going, looking at his bench, you got Saquon Barkley coming back. You have Jameson Williams coming back. We know those are two great players. You have those two coming back, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Reed, who we know is capable of putting up a lot of fantasy points. Still one of the strongest squads in the league. And if he gets this kind of production of Garrett Wilson with 22 targets on the day, he is, one of the favorites to win this league entirely. So Garrett Wilson is my biggest question. Can he continue this sort of production going forward? But at 4-1, you're probably going to, it's expected that you're going to lose one of these. Maybe you're not expecting to lose it against an 0-4 squad, but does get his first loss in the season. But I am not worried about this team. Way too many talented players. And I expect, 9 wins, 10 wins maybe out of this team. 11 wins is certainly possible for Jake's squad when we review at the end of the season. Now let's look at our next matchup of Week 5, and that would be the Pasadena play, going to 3-2 against my lonely Union Bridge Barracudas, 123.36 to 116.62. As I mentioned, Josh goes to 3-2. I go to 1-4 on the season through 5 weeks. But starting with Josh's squad, Joe Flacco, he decides to start in this one, and boy, what a gutsy play. Scores 26 points, 33 for 44, 359, 3 touchdowns. Also has 3 carries, and like it seems with every quarterback in Week 5, loses a fumble. Starts Miles Sanders, and kind of a desperation play. Really did absolutely nothing through 3.5 quarters. Does get a little bit of usage through the air, 2 for 3, 27 yards, 2 carries for 6 yards. Scores a modest 4.3 points. Najee Harris, 14 carries, 42 yards. Little involvement in the passing game, 8.7 points. Chris Godwin on Thursday night, 5 for 6, 64 yards, 9 points. Perfectly solid for him. Brandon Ayuk has his breakout game, 8 for 12, 147 yards in their loss against Arizona. Wan'Dale Robinson, a very popular waiver wire ad in the last couple weeks, 6 for 9, 36 yards, does get in the end zone in Week 5. George Kittle, who I feel like a lot of people aren't talking about, but 8 for 12, 64 yards and a touchdown. Now tight end number 2 on the season. Very quietly having a very good season. We know about the injury issues with the San Francisco 49ers, but he seems to be carving out his own little role with Brandon Ayuk being the outside guy and George Kittle being the inside guy, 16.4 points. Starts Justice Hill, only 5 carries for 17 yards, only 1 catch. Butkerk has 14 points, and Kansas City's defense has 9 points. Looking on his bench, it is just injury galore. Suspensions, injuries, buys, everything. Tyson Hill was out. Trevor Lawrence has 21 points, so good little comeback for him. Anthony Richardson out. Devin Singletary out. Isaiah Pacheco out. And Romeo Doubs on suspension, I believe, for missing a team meeting. He was a little bit upset about his usage, but seems to be coming back in Week 6. So very impressive day for Josh, with all these injuries on his bench, able to scrape a win and now go to 3-2. He says in the text thread that his team has been extremely disappointing, but at 3-2, these are the type of games you need to win to really get into the fantasy playoffs. And once you get into fantasy playoffs, anything can happen. So good on Josh for believing in the squad, believing in Joe Flacco, starting him and getting his third win on the season. My biggest question for Josh's squad, though, is Najee Harris. He seems to have the hold on the majority of carries for that Steelers offense, but hasn't scored over 10 points thus far. Drafted in the middle rounds of the fantasy draft, but he is now the second running back for Josh's squad. With Isaiah Pacheco going out, you're not starting Miles Sanders, and Devin Singletary being out, maybe losing his job as well to Tracy in New York. So he really needs Najee Harris to get it going. That Steelers offense as a whole has been kind of weird. I thought that Najee Harris would be better with Justin Fields as the quarterback. Again, running quarterbacks usually helps the inside rush game for whatever team we're talking about. But Najee Harris hasn't done it thus far. And Josh, to keep the wins continuing and to keep the wins going, he really needs Najee Harris to, score those double-digit points, get some touchdowns, things of that nature. He now has no touchdowns on the season and is running back number 30. So you need more out of him if he wants the wins to continue, just with all the injury issues that he has, Pacheco, things of that nature. So my biggest question is, can Najee Harris get it going? I believe that as the season goes on, he will get better than this. You still have Jalen Warren may be returning. I'm not sure on the status of him. He's the third running back here. He's doubtful for Week 6, so you're going to get a full complement of Najee Harris in Week 6 at least. But it'll be interesting to see when he comes back what his role is and what that means for Najee Harris's fantasy production. But as of right now, you need him to have better than 14 for 42 against some of the stronger teams in the Beltway Wars Invitational. But let's go over to the other side here. I am now 1-4 on the season. Jaden Daniels, the rookie of the year right now, 14 for 25, 238 yards, a touchdown, interception. Does run the ball for 82 yards as well. Jordan Mason, and probably the best matchup he's going to have all season. Really disappointing. 14 carries, 89 yards. Should have ran the ball on the goal line when he was there. They decided to throw it 3 times, and they lose the game. Kyle Shanahan, I hope you learn your lesson. Give him the ball. Rico Dowdle, very, surprising. He has the job now, I would say, there in Dallas. 20 carries, 87 yards. Does get a receiving touchdown against Pittsburgh. Chris Olave, just so frustrating. 2 for 4, 10 yards. How does his role change now if Derek Carr is out for a significant period of time? We're not sure. But it can't be any worse than what it really is. He is now wide receiver number 33 in fantasy football. Mike Evans on Thursday night, 20 points, 2 touchdowns, 62 yards. So Baker is looking for him early and often, it seems. He is just Mr. Consistency in terms of fantasy wide receivers. Deontay Johnson, weird one here. Chicago's defense is pretty good. 3 for 6, 23 yards, 2 carries. Trey McBride coming back from his concussion, 6 for 9, 53 yards. Raheem Mostert now coming back from injury, 19 carries, 80 yards. Does catch 2 balls for 18 yards for 10.8 points. Daniel Carlson, 5 points, and Minnesota's defense, 19 points. Looking at my bench, Brock Purdy, mainly just a backup for me right now when Jane Daniels goes on bye. I did have Pollard on bye. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a late pickup. If I would have started Darius Slayton instead of picking up Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I would have won this week, but I'm not bitter about that at all. Malik Neighbors is out of this one with a concussion. Quentin Johnson was on bye, and I had the Saints defense as well. My biggest question in terms of my squad is Chris Olave, obviously. Drafted very early, I think it was the 3rd round. Needs to be better than wide receiver 33. How does his value change with Derek Carr maybe being out? I'm not even sure. It looks like it's going to be Spencer Rattler, which is, oh my gosh, that's, as any of you hand any Atlanta pass catchers last year, you know that was a debacle. So Not looking good for Chris Olave as long as Derek Carr is out. Does have some interesting matchups. Does have Tampa Bay, Denver, and the Chargers. Denver is not a great matchup, but Tampa Bay is. Can they get him the ball? Can they get him in space? Can they give him interesting ways to get him the ball? I'm not sure. It seems like they like Rashid Shaheed a lot in this offense. He's the more downfield threat. Chris Olave is more the possession guy. So I am nervous, especially at 1-4. I can't afford to have these 2-point weeks out of such a high draft pick. So I am now 1-4, obviously hitting the panic button. I hate fantasy football right now. It is a struggle to do this podcast with how bad I am doing. I don't think I've ever been 1-4 in this league. So I will hope to get my second win in week 6. Hopefully I make better decisions in my starting and sitting, Darius Slayton. I hate you so much. Hopefully Malik Neighbors is back next week. And now going to our last matchup of week 5, featuring our low score of the week. That would be Sarah, now going to 3-2, 85.70 for the Orchard Beach Ovaries. I know how to say it. I just get so nervous when I see it now that I don't know how to say it right. Losing to the Westminster Wonder Boys, now 2-3, 93.24. So let's go over to Scott's team first. Josh Allen leaves this one, I believe. Maybe not 98% of the snap count, but does get banged up in this one. Only 14 points. 9 for 30, 131 yards and a touchdown. Not great efficiency. Not worried about him. He will figure it out. He'll get the rushing yards. He'll get the rushing touchdowns. So I am not too concerned about Josh Allen. Just a bad week for him. Bijan Robinson, 12 carries, 61 yards. 3 for 3 through the air. 16 yards. Rashad White, 10 carries for 72 yards. Look at that efficiency. Everyone's talking about Bucky Irving, but he has a good efficiency day. 7.2 yards per carry in this one. 3 for 3 through the air. -6 yards, which is an odd stat line. Michael Pittman, with Joe Flacco at the helm, 5 for 8, 37 yards, does get in the end zone. Terry McLaurin, continuing to have that good rapport with Jaden Daniels there in Washington, 4 for 8, 112 yards. Jared Jeudy, like I said, that whole Cleveland offense is very, is not good right now. 1 for 3, 16 yards. Tyler Conklin, 6 for 9, 55 yards. Tutu Atwell, 6 for 10, 58 yards. The kicker for Green Bay goes 7 points, and New England scores 10 points. On his bench, a couple interesting players here. Tank Bigsby, has he won that job in Jacksonville? Only 40% snap count, but was his largest snap count share thus far this season. 13 carries, 101 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looks to be the better running back right now. It looks like that he should be the first down, second down back, with Travis Etienne being the third down back right now. So very interesting development there in Jacksonville as they've struggled this season. He looks to be one of the bright spots on that offense along with Brian Thompson Jr. 13 carries, 101 yards. That's something that you can't just go away from next week. It'll be interesting to see how his usage continues going forward. Also, Keon Coleman does only catch one ball, but does get in the end zone. Someone needs to step up there in Buffalo. It should be him. He's the first-round draft pick wide receiver out of Florida State. Very talented. Josh Allen just needs to get on the same page with him, but does have that big play ability that Buffalo is sorely missing. Tyler Lockett as well, 4 for 6, 75 yards. A nice little day. Probably a wide receiver 3 going forward. My biggest question, though, for this squad is Bijan Robinson. We talked about it last year, and we thought it was going to change with Arthur Smith now leaving for Pittsburgh. But the usage is just not there for a top, first-round draft pick running back. 67%. He's still splitting carries with Tyler Algier. He has 5 yards per carry. They're just not using him. I don't understand it. I don't know if they want to keep him fresh. I don't know if they don't like him in certain scenarios in terms of pass blocking or protections or things of that nature. But in this very high-scoring game, you're hoping that he's way more effective than he was. So I'm a little bit concerned because now there's a little bit of a track record going back to last season. Did finish as number 9 last year, but where he was drafted this year, you're expecting top 5 production, and right now he's running back number 21 on the season. So concerning for sure. He has all the talent in the world. He was a first-round draft pick, a high first-round draft pick in the NFL draft. He came out of Texas, SEC football. He should be getting way more production. His snap count should be way higher than it is. There's just something missing, something that's not being told about the situation. You know, even going back to last year, I don't know if he's like, I don't know if he's in a doghouse for some reason or if he's just a bad team. I have no idea, but there's no reason why he should only be on the field 67% of the snaps. You know, can catch the ball in the backfield, is obviously a very violent runner. I don't know why they're not using him more. And it's very concerning now because it goes all the way back to 2023 where his usage is just low. He hasn't hit 20 carries this season. And that's just very odd to me with where they drafted him. That whole Falcons front office is very strange. You know, they sign Kirk Cousins and draft Michael Penix. It doesn't seem like they know what they want to do. It's just very unknown of what his usage is going to be. As of right now, and probably in the future, because we haven't seen it yet, he's probably a mid running back 2. And that is something you cannot have with someone that you drafted in the first round. But with all that doom and gloom, Scott does go to 2-3, so does get his second victory of the season. So good on him for that. But let's go over to the losing side and the low points of this week with 85.70. The Orchard Beach Ovaries. Baker Mayfield has a nice day here. 19 for 24, 180 yards, 3 touchdowns on Thursday night. Devin Achane goes out of this one with a concussion early. Only 3 carries for 18 yards. I believe he had concussion problems last year, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure. Maybe it was like a ankle or hamstring. But what I've been reading about concussions is that usually it's like a week miss, so the week 6 bye comes at the perfect time. He should be back week 7. But just very unfortunate for Sarah that he goes out early in this one. Chase Brown, 12 carries, 46 yards, 2-point conversion, does catch a ball in the end zone against Baltimore. CeeDee Lamb, 5 for 9, 62 yards. You'd like to see him get in the end zone, but we are not worried about CeeDee Lamb. He will get better as the season goes on for sure. He's probably still getting in shape. He's probably close to 100% now just from holding out throughout the preseason. Stephon Diggs, 6 for 8, 82 yards, a fine day. George Pickens, 3 for 7, 26 yards. Zach Ertz, she has to start here, 2 for 8, 10 yards. Dotavius Wicks, big. I was pretty big on him. I picked him up in another league. I started him in that other league. Had a couple drops in this one, only 2 for 7, 20 yards. M. McPherson with 4 points, and the Jets defense with 12 points. Looking at her squad, though, a lot of buys here. Jalen Hurts with a bye, David Montgomery with a bye, Tajay Spears with a bye, McConkey with a bye, and Evan Ingram out of this one, so that's why she has to start Zach Ertz. But it looks like he's returning week 6, so she should slide him right back into the lineup. My biggest question for Sarah's squad, though, is George Pickens. All the talent in the world, first-round draft pick as well 2 years ago. Haven't been able to get him the ball consistently. The snap counts are also, talking about Bijan, but snap counts here, they go from 68, 77, 74, 86, 59. Like, what is going on? He should be 80 plus every single week. No touchdowns on the season, so they're not looking for him in the red zone. He hasn't had that breakaway game yet. He had a nice game in week 4, but has a disappointing game in this one. Looking at his next 3 weeks, has a plus matchup with Vegas, a hard matchup against the Jets, and a plus matchup against the Giants. All the talent in the world, again, George Pickens, out of Georgia, can, if they continue with Justin Fields, Is this more of the same kind of thing, kind of up and down, no really monster games? If they go to Russell Wilson, how does that change? I think that Russell Wilson is probably better for George Pickens. I think he's more of a complete passer than Justin Fields is. So maybe Sarah will be hoping for that change in quarterback for George Pickens to really get going, because she needs him with, really question marks at wide receiver 2 with Diggs and question marks at wide receiver 3 with Pickens. Need him to be there because there are no better options on her bench in terms of wide receivers. Maybe Wicks can be that guy, but he's having drop issues. So she really needs Pickens to really get going. Maybe the quarterback change is needed. And if that quarterback change does happen, let's say Pittsburgh loses next week to Vegas, maybe the quarterback change will happen and Russell Wilson, becomes a starter and Pickens has better days. I think this is kind of what you're going to see with Fields, though, is a lot of inconsistency. So I think that if you are Sarah, you're hoping that Russell Wilson comes into the fold sooner rather than later so that she can get solid production week in and week out with George Pickens. But at 3-2, still good. A rough week for her, but, you have more wins than losses. So going forward, you're hoping that things turn around. You're hoping Achane comes back and your bench, with all the buys, very buy-heavy week, you have a lot of good options to bring back for week 6. But that is all our matchups for week 5. Let's go ahead and look at week 6 just for a little bit of a preview. I go against Alex, the 1-4 and 1-4s. Jake goes against Josh, 4-1 versus 3-2. Patrick goes against Sarah, 4-1 versus 3-2. Dustin goes against Brian, 2-3 versus 4-1. Tom goes against Mike, 2-3 versus 1-4. And Charlie, Dirty Charlie, goes against Scott, 3-2 versus 2-3. When Charlie plays Scott, Tom, those type of players, there should be some trash talk, so I will be interesting to look out for that. But that is our show, my show for today. I'm sorry if you had to painfully listen through this. But hopefully we will get Pat back next week, and we'll have better back and forth, because back and forth between one person is impossible. So with that, we will see you in week 6. And have a good week, and have a good fantasy week 6, all of you. And I will see you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening and your support. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.